Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, September 12th. The time is now 3 minutes past 7. We will start with roll call. Susan Axelrod?
Here.
Joe Murphy is absent. Liz Karp? Peter DiStefano? Robin Pothier? Paul Jordan is absent, and Maria Mack is here. Our first agenda item is planning objectives, hot topic items, relative to the upcoming follow-up meeting with the town council and the various categories that will be up for discussion. Jamie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Based on the discussion last month, I think there were two primary items, and one was Old Tower Hill, which we're in the process of bringing a consulting on board with, and the second was affordable housing. And a lot of the discussion from my notes and looking back at the tapes on affordable housing is really involved in what is affordable housing, what does affordable housing mean to South Kingstown, what does affordable housing mean to me, what are the implications of market conditions, supply and demand, state legislation mandating 10% or asking towns to achieve 10%. So I put together about 20 slides tonight to engage you as planning board members on the subject matter, potentially refine the presentation, and whether it's a presentation or a handout with council, so that everybody, from my perspective, can start to understand what affordable housing means to the planning board, what affordable housing means to the residents, what affordable housing means to the community, and what are the market conditions you are up against to both as a planning board, as a community, private sector, nonprofit, on the deliverability of a unit in South Kingstown. So if you'll bear with me, I'll go through a few things. And again, I only have 20 slides. You have a copy of the 20 slides. I've actually this afternoon added 3 more just for discussion purposes, which I will provide digitally to everyone. So with that being said, again, basically trying to understand the economics surrounding affordable housing in South Kingstown. With regards to that is, what does affordable housing mean, and how does market value affect housing units? Again, what is that definition? What is the definition of affordable housing to a prospective homeowner? If I asked Robin what affordable housing meant to her, it may be different than what Peter explanation is versus Maria and Liz and Susan. So we'll try and work through that a little bit. It's extremely difficult to define because from my perspective as a planning director, maybe having different resources to someone who may work in the service industry in town, my definition of affordability in South Kingstown may be different than someone who works at Shores Market, which may be different than a school teacher here, which may be different than someone who's a doctor at the hospital. So affordability is really individualized based on your financial situation. So with all that background, how do we attempt to define it? The rule of thumb is really financially driven, and that financially driven rule of thumb is that 30% of your net income should be, can be, or could be allocated for your housing costs. And whether it's purchasing or rental, that equates to a mortgage or rent, taxes, insurance, and essential utilities. So someone making $100,000 a year, simple math would be you would have $30,000 for housing. According to Rhode Island state law, when we talk about affordability for housing, they define that under the comprehensive permit process of 80% of the area median income, or AMI, where no more than 30% is spent on those housing costs. Your mortgage, your rent, your utilities, an HOA fee. And again, if it's simple math on $100,000 under comprehensive permit in Rhode Island law, they're saying you only have 80,000. So that would only be $24,000 per year or $2,000 a month to meet the definition of affordability within Rhode Island. And added to that is that any market value affordable has to be deed restricted and for no less than 30 years. So if it's a rental, no less than 30. If it's a for sale unit, no less than 30. How does that AMI relate to South Kingstown based on the financials in 2023? The AMI in South Kingstown, according to Rhode Island Housing, for one person is 57, 265, 373, 481, 588, and 6-person is 95,000. And you have that table in this chart. We have the hard copy for that. Now, in this chart, it's broken up to 80%, 100%, and 120. And I have a slide for that for you later also. So this is just a quick table that goes over what the monthly costs are associated with those area median incomes. So going back to what affordable means to the community, just generally it's places for our kids to live, it's places for people to raise a family like all of you have, and it's housing for essential workers, teachers, police, fire, etc. And this is just under the broad definition of affordable housing, what people feel is affordable. And, you know, Robin, when you moved here, you probably, in your mind, knew what you and your husband were willing to spend on affordability, and that may have been different than when Susan moved to town, which is different than the definition under state law. When you look at AMI and that 30 percentile for what you can spend on a mortgage or rent and what you can spend at the 80th percentile of 80, all of that goes to purchasing power and what that mortgage or rent buys you in the marketplace. And one of the difficult things is with $100,000 of gross income, which gives you on a rule of thumb, $30,000 for housing under AMI and Rhode Island law gives you $24,000. That equates to a $376,000 housing unit. Anybody want to know how many housing units are available for sale for $376,000 in South Kingstown today? What? There's one. There is one, Peter. It's 500 square feet. So if you get closer to what market conditions are in town of 564, and there's only a few houses in the 499 range in town, that requires $150,000 of gross income. To get to where you see more houses in a price point of 752, that requires $200,000 of gross income. Liz, you have a quick question? Yeah. So how is the market value set in any community, not just South Kingstown, and there's a couple things that influence. In kind of layman terms, market value is derived by what someone is willing to pay in your community. And some communities are more desirable than others. It could be locational based, it could be education based, it could be attributes within the community of parks, recreation, location to the ocean, parks, recreation, open space, state forest. There's a number of things, but in the end, It's what someone is willing to pay for a housing unit in a particular community drives the market rate. It is also influenced not just by location and amenities, but also supply and demand. Okay, so again, general economic conditions, employment outlook, interest rates, and supply and demand also affect market rate. One of the things that, simple economics, if demand is high and supply is low, what happens to housing prices? They rise, right? Yeah. Can you just turn, Liz, so we can get the recording of, yeah, thank you. So which one do you want to go back to?
Just how the market value is set. Isn't Airbnb kind of an anomaly in all that? Because people will spend much more on a unit, on a house, that they can then divide up into one or two Airbnbs, and it has nothing to do really with the location. It just means they can afford a whole lot more because they're getting money back, so much money back.
Well, it goes back to the earlier slides is, what is affordability defined by an individual? An investor who's looking at a residential property as a commercial financial spreadsheet, their definition of affordability is driven by that Excel spreadsheet on return on investment. So in a desirable community close to the ocean, that market condition changes because their ability to rent, as a unit in South Kingstown has a different value than a unit in Hopkinton, which has a different value of an Airbnb in Foster, Rhode Island.
So,
And again, so that affects a little bit of market conditions, but a lot of the market conditions are still driven by the family who wants to move here.
Right.
Jamie, since you just mentioned location, which is very important, perhaps that last portion of that slide, you could add location.
Okay. Yep. So I looked at, and I do this regularly, I want to say once every couple of weeks, if not weekly. I visit Zillow and Reddit to see what the market conditions are, both from a commercial standpoint and LoopNet and a residential standpoint in the community, to see if anything's changing, even as interest rates climb to 7 to 7.25% for a 30-year mortgage. This is a house that was on Zillow. It was on the market last week. It is priced at $349,900. It is 560 square feet, so it is $624 a square foot. The net income needed to afford that house is $92,500 if you use the rule of thumb of 30% of your gross income. And that's for 560 square feet. So when I look at market conditions that drive a 500 square foot house to be $350,000, I then go to look at what the raw land value is in town, and what you potentially see is this isn't necessarily a house for sale. This is a lot for sale that has a structure on it.
What's the lot size?
This lot size, I think, was about 11, 12,000.
It's an acre and a half, Jamie.
Or was it an acre and a half on this one? Sorry. Again, 92,500 for what is needed here. And I do want, and I'm just doing a few samples. You went 349. The next jump in price point was 499, or just at $500,000, and then the next jump was 599 to 615. But in the 599 to 615, you saw your square footage go up. So the photo on the left is a simple ranch. It is 1,500 square feet, and it is priced at $600,000. The one on the right is a two-bedroom ranch with a dormer, a faux dormer in the middle. That is 1,900 square feet, and that's at $615. So the one on the left is just under $400 a square foot. The one on the right is $321. The net income needed to afford those is plus or minus $160,000 a year. Now again, I handed everyone this chart. It doesn't go up to $161,000 a year to be able to afford a two-bedroom, 1,500 to 1,600 foot. The income for an 8-person at 120% AMI maxes out at 162. So under the affordability definition, someone making 120% of the area median income gets there if they're an 8-person household. But I'm not sure an 8-person household can live in a 2-bedroom home. So it'd be tight quarters. And again, this is the slide showing the $499 price points. The income to be able to afford a $500,000 home in town is $132,000. Those were 1,300 and 1,600 square feet. So kind of with that discussion, who is responsible for filling the need of affordable housing in South Kingstown? Is it the federal government who has responsibility, state government, local government, or the private sector? With regards to the federal government, they have loan programs in place. With regards to state government, there are grants available and loans available to developers. With regards to local government, we have some zoning incentives for density bonuses. The local development community has development initiatives utilizing state law and the comprehensive permit. And then the private sector really has no responsibility to supply affordable housing to the marketplace. You know, there may be a moral obligation that a developer wants to take that on, but typically what you're seeing in the private sector is utilizing what local government has provided in the form of density bonuses through zoning, or utilizing the comprehensive permit process through state government to getting additional density where perhaps density wasn't allowed. And that's how they're bringing affordable housing to the marketplace.
And they're also there to make a living so that they can then choose where they would like to live. I mean, it's,
Correct.
you know.
Yep.
To be,
If you're a builder and that is your sole source of income, you need to build houses to supply your income. If you are a developer and you develop residential properties, you need to continue to develop to continue to have cash flow for your income and the people in their company's income. So it's kind of a never-ending straight line profile. Again, going back to the purchasing power, market rate versus affordable for a family of 4 at a 4% interest. Market rate, as I discussed before, on a $100,000 income buys you a $376,000 house, which does not exist in South Kingstown. If you bump it up to $150,000 worth of income, you can go to $564,000. There are 2 houses in that price point for you at $499,000. If you're fortunate to make $200,000 a year, you can jump up to $752,000, and then you can look at those houses that were in the 600s, the $499s, and the $349,000. Where AMI brings you at 80%, your income for a 4-family is $81,900. You can buy a $224,000 unit. If you go to 100% of AMI at $106,000, you can buy a unit for $291,000. And if you can go to 120% of AMI, your gross income is $122,000, and you can afford a house of $316,000, of which none exist in town. So the marketplace, given market conditions, is not supplying affordable units to Rhode Island's definition of affordability. Given market conditions and the fact that interest rates have gone up to 7%. And I'll put a quick slide up in an Excel spreadsheet to show you the difference in purchasing power at 3% and purchasing power at 7% for a mortgage rate. In some aspects, the person who's in that $150,000 range, because interest rates have gone up to 7%, they've lost over $100,000 in purchasing power. Difference between 3% in a mortgage rate and 7%. What's very interesting, and I've talked to a number of realtors, builders, developers, and attorneys who work in the housing market, is that as interest rates climbed, housing prices haven't adjusted. Housing prices remain to be stagnant or increasing. You know, the good condition housing stock has not devalued given 7% interest rates. And I think a lot of that has to do with supply and demand, and also the fact, and Peter potentially can weigh on this later, is the cost of new construction is far exceeding the per square foot cost of a 40-year-old house priced at $800,000. You cannot build that new. So it's keeping those older homes at that square footage at a higher market rate. Again, purchasing power dilemma. If you have 122,000 gross income at 120% of AMI, you can only afford 316,000. The number, and again, we just talked about this, to see if who was paying attention. How many homes are available for sale in South Kingstown below 349? It's actually 0. So, and again, I think it was 349 and change. And again, it may be 1. And I would really consider that 500 square foot house on 1.5 acres as a lot for sale. So this is the dilemma that everybody is trying to solve. The state is trying to legislate a way out. The developers are trying to density their way in to where density may not be allowed. And even they are struggling with making the numbers work given the conditions of market rate units and construction costs. Under purchasing power, I did the math on 5 lots that are presently for sale in town. There is a lot for sale for $225. It's 10,000 square feet. There's one lot for sale for $337 at 13,000 square feet. There's a $350,000 lot at 6,500 square feet. You can pay $700,000 for 10,000 and $700,000 for just under an acre. The one that is $337,000 is on Rodman. There was a house there. That house was raised and only a foundation remains. So that is a house lot at 14, we'll call it 14,000 square feet for $337,000, and that just received a $42,000 price reduction. So that house prior to that price reduction was at $380,000. If you, and I talked to a few nonprofits who build homes. If you look at a typical starter home that the nonprofits are building of 1,200 square feet, they're in the plus or minus range of $210 a square foot. So that starter home costs $252,000 to construct. You go to the least expensive lot in town of $225,000, and that house costs $477,000. That requires $127,000 of gross income. And if you go back to your chart, a 4-person household at 120% of AMI only makes $122,000. So, the economics and math between market rate and AMI affordable are difficult to align. So again, at gross income of 120 AMI, you're at 316. At 122 AMI, 100%, you're at 291. Neither one of those AMIs get you the 477. And that's a nonprofit building a house on a market rate lot. So what has to give? If you're at a lowest price lot of 225 and you put the starter home construction of 225 on top of 252 on top of that, this is the maximum land value that you can have. At 120 AMI, that $225,000 lot has to come down to 91,000. At 100% of AMI, that lot has to come down to 66,000. And at 80% AMI, someone has to give you the lot and $800. So, in essence, the land purchase has to be subsidized. So again, some conclusions in that are that the land purchase and/or construction costs must be subsidized. Otherwise, the marketplace struggles to bring an affordable unit to that same marketplace. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but this is how the math and the accounting side of me bears everything out.
Is it possible, or let me rephrase that, do we have any predictions about what's going to happen with mortgage rates? And likewise, any predictions of what will happen to home costs if the mortgage rates, because typically when mortgage rates go up, housing costs go down. But as you said, that's not happening.
Yeah, some of the difficulties and we haven't, again, I want to say I'm out over my skis, but on the economy side, as a planner, I've lived through two housing cycles in the 80s and the 90s. And one of the substantial differences in those, whether they're downturns, market corrections, is construction costs and labor costs remained stable during both of those downturns. In this, where we are today, because of COVID, you saw market conditions associated with construction costs due to lumber pricing, window pricing, and all of the things that go into a house go up by 75 to 100%. And you also saw labor rates increase by upwards of 50%. That didn't occur in the 2000s or the 90s. So it's so to your point, if, say there was a correction back to 4.5 or 5%, I don't see a correction in lumber rates or labor rates. I mean, Peter works in the building industry, and if you now have to pay your labor rate at higher, what do you do 2 years from now? Cut their pay by 25%? Right, so again, I think it's unique in this setting that we're in, and we don't have a historic track record to go back and say what happens. I think what you saw in the 90s and in the 2000s is when interest rates moved and when economy changes, there was a correction in the marketplace. The difficulty is, I mean, if you own 3,000 square feet and I went to a builder and said, I want to build that, and he tells you it's 350,000 a square foot, which puts you almost at $1 million. Then you add a lot cost of 300,000, so you're at 1.3. Liz, if you were holding on to a 3,000 square foot house, even if it was from the 80s, what are you going to put it in the marketplace at? If new construction costs 1.3, you're not going to be at 6 or 7 anymore. Because the choice to someone entering the 3,000 square foot marketplace is build new at 1.3 or buy a older, genuinely historic home, not just by age, at 859. And typically, we wouldn't see that because someone would say, fine, I'll go build at $200 a square foot, and I'll build the same thing. I'm not buying your older home that's dated, and I got to redo the kitchen and the bathrooms. But because construction and labor costs are so high, I don't see that price correction right now. And again, I'm not an economist, but this is what I've living through 2 other housing kind of corrections in the economy and marketplace. I see different conditions today.
Well, and I think you're right, a lot of that is COVID, and that one's a hard nut to predict, because there is the theory that COVID is on the rise again, and you just don't have the ability to have a crystal ball when that comes zooming back.
But I mean, a 2x4 used to be $2. What's a 2x4 now? Yeah. A garage door used to be $850. Garage door is $1,500 to $2,000 now. And maybe a 6-month lead time.
That you have to add that extra time in too.
Yeah.
'Cause that's money.
Yes. So,
A couple of thoughts, Jamie. Thank you for starting this, because obviously we want to be well prepared for our work session with the council. You may want to consider broadening the sort of topic under affordable housing. You have explanation of the economics. I don't know if you want to add something like practical implications so that it's not just economics, because I think that we need to be prepared for questions and to be really specific about actually how deed restriction works. I don't think that there is a tremendous amount of broad-based understanding. It's my belief that probably the role and authority of the planning board will come up. Things like capacity, cost of community services, the mention of other communities of similar size and population, that they are having the same challenges.
I do have a slide.
Okay.
I said I added 3, so I have those. I can show you those in a moment.
Okay, and then also things such as, you did mention grants, either grants from Rhode Island Housing or the new Department of Housing, which seems to have quite a bit of money and personnel. And yes, the explanation of the cost of land, the interest rates, and it may or may not be worth noting, but just, as an FYI, in the 90s, South Kingstown implemented a pacing and phasing ordinance to try to even out the number of building permits, and it was all based on school capacity.
Again, and Maria, all valuable points to, whether it's expanding or refining the discussion to try and utilize the time the most. But again, how do you increase affordability in South Kingstown? Is there a financing program? Are there grants available? Do you offer regulatory relief? And what form does that regulatory relief undertake? Is it a form of a density bonus? Is there a pathway to permitting quicker? Is there an area of town that you identify as a landing zone for more density because you're trying to steer growth in a particular area versus an area you would want to see less growth because it's incompatible with the existing dynamics of neighborhoods?
Yeah, there may be a perception that the planning staff and planning board has a greater degree of ability to actually somehow produce housing.
Yeah, and to that
So
point, is it
Again, just
property
be
acquisition or
aware of
or
that.
public partnership? The difficulty of the planning board, and I probably should have a slide for the planning board, is, and I'm gonna make a note of that you are a regulatory agency or entity that processes land use applications under the town's regulations. You are not a construction board, a housing creation board, and the only one of your tools is that you have, though, is to suggest regulatory changes, but you're not the one who makes those regulatory changes, the town council is. But I think the town council would appreciate any discussion or path that you explore to potentially try and align those market conditions with the ability to bring affordable units to town. Because the problem is not necessarily going to go away quicker. It's the potential that the town goes after money from the state to acquire property, which it then puts out in the private sector or nonprofit sector to deliver housing units to the community. But that's way potentially beyond the scope and bandwidth of the planning board. That's asking the council to do something also.
But in our role with regard to the comprehensive plan and the long-range planning, that's something that we can discuss and suggest. The town owns property. They can decide to look for, well, for example, the schools that are now or will be closed. They can look for grants to help with the demolition so that then they can potentially work with a nonprofit organization and other entities to build affordable housing that may be more impactful.
Yes. And you also have the ability to potentially, as a planning board, identify properties that are out there in the private sector that if they became available, are they potential acquisition targets by the municipality to supply affordable housing? And I think the discussion that I've had with some of the nonprofits and some of the development community is that if land was available, they have the bandwidth, but those market conditions of the price of raw land makes it difficult, and there are better economic conditions elsewhere in New England or other towns within Rhode Island that they're going to go to.
So can I be clear that what you're doing tonight is kind of a dry run of what would be presented to town council when we meet with them? Is that what this is?
I am providing information to you, and it is your decision of what you want to bring forward from a discussion standpoint with council.
Because I think for me, we're 30 minutes into this presentation, which is all the time we have budgeted for town council. And if there are people on town council who want to know exactly what affordable housing is, I think we haven't gotten there yet. Like, I don't think that I would understand that based on the presentation so far. I don't know what AMI is. I don't really care. I want to know where the affordable housing is. So I think for me, this needs to be tightened up and just say, this is what it costs to live here, this is how much money you need to make, and this is what affordable housing is. And then just move on to how we get there, not necessarily so much in the weeds.
No.
The details of AMI and interest rates, and, oh, that's just messy. We just want to get to affordability and go, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, that's my thought.
I think, so I think there's a lot of good information here. I think one piece that's really key is we say affordable housing, and we talk about this deed-restricted affordable housing, and then we get confused with workforce, blue collar, whatever we want to call that other house. There needs to be very clear distinctions on there that says what is what. Because I think sometimes on this board or the town council, they say we need more affordable housing we need firefighters to be able to live here or school teachers. Well, that's not what we're all talking about. So I think there are two very different conversations. So I think it just needs to be very clear what we mean by that. I think from what I take from a lot of this stuff is the blue-collar workforce housing, we really have no control over, unless we have a density issue.
It's a gap, because
Middle
you,
piece is nothing and what I see actually is, math that I was just doing quickly in my head, when you showed that the $210 a square foot, which I would love to find out who the hell can build for that cheap. I know one guy, but in reality, it's almost counterproductive to workforce housing, right? So a developer has to, say they have 10 houses and we tell them they have to put 3 affordable houses or to meet the requirement to get some waivers. They're gonna lose money on all 3 of those houses, and the money they're gonna lose on that, they're gonna add to the market rate houses to make up the difference. So it's actually that affordable housing is affecting that workforce housing.
the middle.
But wait, Peter, so if the market says, though, that they can ask this much for that market rate house, I think they're going to ask that regardless of whether or not they lost money on their affordable housing. If the
They're
market
gonna
will,
ask more.
but they can only ask so much, that's what the market will bear. They
Right,
can't put the price above what the market will bear, but they will go to what the market will bear.
but it's not gonna go less. There was a development we approved that everyone's up in arms about, oh my God, he said he was gonna build affordable housing and blah, 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 and he got smaller amount of the real affordable AMI stuff. They have to offset the cost of that. The loss there, they're gonna have to make it up. So they're not gonna say, well, I can get 700, I'm gonna reduce it to 650 because I wanna help that. They're gonna say, I need that extra 50K because they lost 50K on each one of those houses.
They're never going to give back the 50K if they can get the 50K. Like, I mean, a charitable is nice, but I don't think that that's realistic to think that any developer would take less than top dollar if it were available, or any person selling a house. If you can get it, you're going to get it, regardless of
Yeah, no,
anything else.
I completely 100% agree. I'm just saying it is counterproductive to what we've talked about, or people have talked about as blue-collar housing. It is not helping that.
Yeah, to Peter's point, and I'll try and summarize what you're saying is, the way the legislation works is the deed restricted affordable under the definition of Rhode Island law that allows the developer to use a comp permit supplies one segment of the population, and that's on this table. And for a 4-family at 80% of AMI, that maxes out at $81,000 a year. So if you're a school teacher and a policeman, you're over that. And then in that legislation, in that development, the developer, because the legislation says do them at 80% of AMI, his next price point is 3 times what that AMI unit is. So if the AMI unit's selling for 300, potentially the market rates in the same development are pushing 7, 8, or 9. And and to Peter's point, there's a big gap in the marketplace between what is deed restricted affordable and what is entry-level starter home in town. And right now, a starter home in town is $500,000.
So we
The
have to be-
marketplace is driving that.
And this goes back to one of our previous discussions, is the big A and the little a. I think there needs to be clarity with regard to how that's brought forward.
Right.
And then maybe, I think we also mentioned creating some kind of a cheat sheet that maybe is sent to everyone in advance, so they have some basics, some definitions that will kind of, if we're limited to.
That's a good idea.
Hopefully, we're not going to be limited to 30 minutes, but that's
So
pretty
a
challenging.
couple of slides that I added is that there are 39 municipalities in Rhode Island. You are not alone. There are only 5 communities in Rhode Island that meet the 10%. And you have it in your presentation, but you're at just over 5%, 5.04%. Mathematically, you're not going to catch up. You need another 505 units, and if you do that 25% of at a time, the math, 25% of 1,000 units is only 250. So you would need 2,000 units to come into the marketplace at 25% affordable to catch up.
If they were all comp permits.
If they were all
If they were
comparable.
one-offs, you'll never get there.
And the difficulty is with the one-offs, you probably have to, and I'm going to ask Carol Baker in our GIS to do that, is how many vacant lots that don't have a house on them, that aren't subject to inclusionary zoning, that aren't subject to comprehensive permits, can just be built. Because if over the next 10 years, 500 one-offs are built, you don't get a single affordable unit. So you go from 5% to maybe 4%, even though you're trying to build affordable units, but the one-offs have no regulatory requirement to build any component of affordability. It's only when we get to 6 or more units under inclusion or when we get to a comprehensive permit process.
And the other factor is that 10% is not going to remain static.
No, because as time progresses, units drop off of that list.
And market rate units are added, so.
Market rate units are added.
You might want to also explain that the new modern idea of planning is that affordable units are integrated into communities, that developments like Champaign Heights are not the modern way of planning for affordable housing.
I would go back to Peter's point that facilities like Champaign Heights and other holdings by the South Kingstown Housing Authority are different than the AMI units that the Rhode Island legislature is looking for, which is different than the workforce housing of the school teacher, nurse, firefighter, town hall employee, restaurant worker, which is different than the entry level of $500,000 for a 1,200 square foot home in town.
Right, and the subsidies and grants that go along with that are completely.
But again, without subsidy, you face an extremely uphill battle.
So would building 100 units at Curtis Corner land that are all, I don't know, subsidized housing or low-income housing, is that even a thing anymore? Because I think that might be what some people in town might be proposing for the vacant land. And so if they wanted, so I don't feel like that's sort of the way that we're trending, is to have one development like that anymore. But if that's what people are, if that's what people in town or people are thinking about, maybe we need to address whether that's even a possibility and the pros and cons of that sort of development.
I mean, I've heard not group conversations on that subject matter, but individual conversations of what properties are the town holding that could become available for affordable housing. I haven't heard anyone say 100% affordable. I have heard certain members of the community and the elected officials in the community talk about the integration of units within the community and not putting all the units in one place. So if you had, a 100-acre tract somewhere, or even, we'll make it smaller, a 10-acre tract, and on that 10 acres you could do density of 1 unit per 10,000 square feet or 40 units, that potentially 50% would be market rate, and then you would have some at 80, some at 100, and some at 120. But they would be intermixed, and that would either be done in a private-public partnership. The town is not positioned outside of the housing authority to build buildings in the residential realm. So it would have to be, in my view, an RFP, an RFQ, putting land out to the private sector with certain conditions so that, the market drives the potential profitability of the private sector to bring affordable units to the marketplace. And they can't do that. I shouldn't say they can't. It is difficult for them to do that if they're acquiring land today. Now, they may have acquired land 20 years ago, so that's starting at a different price point. But to go out and buy 10 acres today that is readily developable is potentially in the $2 million range. I did the math. To deliver that unit with a very low per square foot cost of $210, you have to give someone land and money. It's not just a matter of giving them the land. The costs still don't bear out, given construction costs.
You know, Jamie, there have been some projects around the state in which they have built, again, with partnerships with the towns and nonprofits, and it has been 100% affordable, and they are, and by the way, I think it's a bad idea to use the term low income because we have other terms now, and it just sets, that's okay. But I think we need to stress how much a higher percentage is needed. You know, being stuck with this 25% is,
Do we have power without grants to go above 25%?
well, again, you have to have the land, you have to work with the right partner, and, you know, the town has a certain amount of authority, they have zoning authority.
And they have resources, I mean, sewer, water, they can bring that to areas that don't have it to help. I mean, that's part of it too. Town can step up.
And some of these properties, they already have sewer and water, so that's really the kind of prime areas.
And again, it's another task that someone has to take on, just like a private developer would be looking for land in town. Who has the responsibility to now go look for land that's available in town, that is readily developable, that has the ability to be acquired, because just because there's vacant, undeveloped land doesn't mean it is readily in the marketplace. And if you identify a parcel, what financial resources are there available to the municipality or others to acquire that land and then deliver a product? Of projects that have been financed. We can provide some examples. I know there's one in North Kingstown, Habitat for Humanity is doing one or starting one in Westerly, but it's not 100% affordable.
Church Community Housing has done a few, One Neighborhood Builders have done some.
You have the Patuxent group in Pawtucket that's doing it. They actually own one piece in town, and they're potentially looking at that. But again, they're using grants and loans from the state to acquire that land because the land costs in South Kingstown are high. And if without political will at the local level and the state level, if I'm doling out $1 million and $1 million in South Kingstown can only deliver 10 units and $1 million in Hopkinton can deliver 30, who has the fiduciary responsibility to spend those state funds to get 30 units versus 10? And someone needs the political will to say the 10 in South Kingstown are more important than the 30 elsewhere. And that's another discussion at another level.
Anything else that folks feel Jamie should add to this presentation? And we don't actually know when
We do not have a date. It was potentially the 25th, I believe, is the next council meeting. I I can't verify that now.
I think it might be helpful to have a bulleted list of strategies, a tight, concise list of strategies. And if one is federal grants to help subsidize development, that would be one. Or I don't know if there's any programs where you can purchase already built housing units and convert them into somehow becoming affordable, if that's a strategy. Like, I think that the beginning of your presentation was pretty sad, and now we need some hope about,
This is my hope
She
slide.
means depressing, not lame.
not sad, not like, poorly done, just, my kids will never be able to afford to live here. So now we need some hope, and I think a strategy, a quick strategy list of different things that we are working on, that the council can work on, that the state is working on, that, a grant writer could help with, or just like a strategy for getting to a solution to the problem would be, and a tight bullet list of that would be good.
And if I can follow up with Susan to develop a list, but I have 6 items up on a slide. Financing, grants, regulatory relief, density bonus, property acquisitions, private-public partnership.
Put them in a different format with bullets and have a little blurb after each.
Property
That
acquisition by
explains-
who? Financing by who? I don't understand what,
Okay.
like, if grants is an option, then say, one option might be for the town to hire a grant writer that could then, and then what is it we would hope for them to do? Like, I don't know what property acquisition means. Is the town buying it? Am I buying it? Is the developer buying it? Who buys that? Like,
The
I need more
town-
explanation.
And again, these are all talking points from my perspective. Property acquisition means the town of South Kingstown actively goes out and purchases property that they will then bring to the marketplace for a developer or nonprofit to bring affordable units
Right.
to this community.
And then maybe that's on their cheat sheet so that after the meeting, they can go home and look it over and review what we talked about.
I'm just going to ask Brian, because he's been involved with the Affordable Housing Committee, if he would like to add anything?
We've been soliciting the Affordable Housing Committee for ideas. There was one idea that somebody came up with that I thought was interestingly stated, which was that, we direct a certain percentage of our real estate tax money into open space preservation. At this point, nearly a third of the town of South Kingstown is protected open space. Yet, we are so far behind on housing. Maybe it's time we start taking some of that money and delegating it to the creation of housing for the community. And I think that point has really stuck with me, particularly as somebody who comes from an environmental background and, really likes to see open space preservation and environmental conservation. But it is a good point. If a third of the town is already protected, maybe that money should be doing something else.
Yeah. And to Brian's point, I did talk to 2 housing advocates in Connecticut who literally live and breathe affordable housing. And one of the things that they honed in on, that bringing affordable housing to the marketplace is not naturally occurring out there. It is something that, in essence, government has to intervene in. And their mindset was that if a community really wants to bring affordable housing to the marketplace, then the community needs to invest in affordable housing. And how they choose to do that, to Brian's point, there are multiple options available. Financing it internally through existing revenue streams, reaching out to state and federal entities for grant or loan opportunities are your other options available to you. It's not as pretty as floating a bond of, a couple $1 million to buy open space or a Boy Scout camp. But it's something that should be discussed, at least put on the table.
And we do have an affordable housing trust fund. We just need to find some ways to accumulate some money in it a bit quicker.
And accumulate, that's key.
I make a couple of other quick points here. Something that might be talked about with the town or the town council is the palatability of building a lot more units in this town in order to get our 25% more deed restricted. That if you want 25 deed restricted affordable houses in the development, you need to be, as a town, willing to accept 100 more units on that space. And that building units that are affordable without also increasing our market rate units isn't an option if we're doing inclusionary or comprehensive permits, that we need to be able to accept a whole lot more density to get those units. And I think the other question I have is there a way to rework the present uses of existing housing stock to bring down the price of housing in town? And that's going to go all the way back to investment properties, out of town investment, and how that's driving the market in town, and whether there is any regulatory things we can do to make more of our housing stock useful by residents as opposed to investment. That building more doesn't necessarily bring the price down if the more is being used as investment properties. And if we don't have some way to rein that in. And maybe there's no way to rein that in, but I think we need to talk about, we can't just build to build our way out of the problem.
Again, there's potential to always regulate Airbnb, but if someone buys a home and rents it annually, I'm not sure you can regulate your way out of that.
Right. But we're becoming a rental community. Right. But 20 some odd percent of our housing units are not used by year-round residents. So it's nearly impossible now for a family to rent a house in town. I think that's going to happen anyway. But how do we? But do we just watch it happen, or is there a way to stop it? You can't pull back. You can't pull back rights once you've given them to people. We saw this last night at the town council meeting. You can't plow the driveway for 50 years and then take that back. We can't let people behave a certain way and then try to change that behavior. Is there a way to nip it now before we become just a Tony expensive community?
Other communities are attempting and have taken action to a certain degree to regulate those type of
Yeah.
transient uses.
Yeah.
Worthwhile, and adaptive reuse is also worthy of discussion. And smart growth strategies, I mean, rather than, and I don't know if that 30% includes the Great Swamp, which is state land, but in the larger context of land use and the climate change crisis that we find ourselves in, we've got to be very aware of the need for clean air, clean water, carbon sequestration, and so on. It's all.
And again, some of it is having the discussion about balancing resource management and open space, because there are a couple significantly large tracts of land in town that may enter the marketplace. And if they enter the marketplace, there's two competing factors. There's the development community, and then there's the preservation community. And perhaps there's a balance between the two. that instead of always going and preserving 2, 3, 4, 500 acres, that you allow a proportion of that to be developed and a proportion of that to be preserved. And again, it's worth the discussion.
So Jamie, in your hot topic items, you do have some other things mentioned that it's unlikely that we will get to. Old Tower Hill Road, Main Street, architectural standards. Unless there's future iterations of this planned work session.
We will continue this discussion as long as you want. I think your short-term goal is to have a few items with council. The primary one was housing, affordable housing, and then Tower Hill. Tower Hill, we should be interviewing with consultants in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'm checking on the availability of the 2 consulting firms and then the availability of the evaluation team. There appears to be general support for developing design and architectural standards, and some of that will be an outgrowth of the Tower Hill Road exercise. So that potentially happens organically in association with that. And, you know, there are small other items that are out there. We do have a heavy lift with legal counsel and making amendments to our existing regulations over the next 4 months to bring those into alignment that with new legislation that becomes effective on January 1st. There are some rumblings that the legislature may stay that date for another 6 months, but we haven't heard any significant movement on that small rumbling. So it would be nice if they gave legal and planning department 6 extra months. You know, because again, Jay Parker from our office attended a roundtable last month, and there are small towns, you know, Hopkinton and Coventry just got a new planner. Forster's got part-time of, you know, they don't have access to legal counsel. They have a planner who's there 10 hours a week. How are they going to accomplish these changes in the next 4 months? So.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's, if communities, either individually or collectively, put together the costs associated with getting this accomplished by January 1st, I think that's really relevant and should be pushed forward to those decision makers. All right, legal legislative updates? Other than
sorry. I'm not going to repeat all that. Hopefully it got picked up on the general stuff. I was talking loud enough. I think in the past, we sometimes have gotten lazy about special use permits when we were writing the ordinance and trying to decide what to put in, and it's like, well, should that be permitted? Yeah, no. All right, let's just make it a special use permit and move on. So what I would like to do tonight is just start off with the use regulations, the use table of the zoning ordinance, and see if we can't take care of the easy ones. We go and say, yeah, hey, that could be just a no, or that could be a yes. It doesn't have to be a special use permit. And then if we can just start by doing that, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, get rid of some of the pending, the ones that we then have to come up with the standards for. If we have time, we can come back and talk about some of those specific objective standards, but I'd kind of just like to see if we can't cut it down, the number of them, right at the beginning. That was my hope for tonight.
And when you say cut it down, you mean to
Cut down the number of uses. or
eliminate the S's?
Cut down the number of, yes, number of S's for which we will then later have to come up with specific and objective criteria. That's what I mean.
And I still don't think, and I've been saying this since Phase 2 zoning, that pig farms should not be allowed in any zone. I think people should be allowed to have, I think you can't have more than 3 or something absurd,
Okay.
my opinion.
Well, I dealt with that before in other rural communities. We because people want to have pig farms or they want to have bacon. We have the legacy of the Pachillo pig farm, and that's unfortunately, I think, what scars everybody's memory. So we can come up with an adult pig density per acre standard. But if we could just start with the S's tonight and try to see what we could do there, would be the goal. So I'm going to start with our first set of S's are under fish hatchery. And we have them as special use we have them not allowed most places, allowed in the R200, R80, R40. I guess my question is there any reason that they need to be special use permits? They're generally done by DEM anyway. Are we worried about a private fish hatchery? And if we are we worried about it in a rural zone? I say yes in R200 and R80 and no in R40?
We did review one in the past, but it was a complicated issue because it was multiple uses on the same lot, so it wasn't limited to fish hatchery.
Is that down at Matunic? Okay, so that was in the commercial waterfront, which was yes anyway.
Yeah.
So how about yes in the R200? Yes in the R80? And no in the R40?
And it, of
I mean,
course, doesn't mean that there isn't a review process.
Right, we're just taking the first cut at it.
Yes.
We're just taking the first cut at it. I'm going to go through it. I'm looking, I'd be doing this, or Jamie, or one of us would be doing it without you anyway. So you're here. If you speak up, if you don't speak up, then we're just going to kind of roll through them, or at least try to. Boarding of animals is actually something I probably would say to leave an S because of the problems with the noise. And I think we probably need specific standards, probably mostly dealing with buffers and distance and how close it can be to the neighbors. So let's leave them there. Okay. Moving along, we're down to 2 household detached structure, which is a special use in the R30. Is there really any, particularly the way we're going with accessory dwelling units and density, is there really any reason why it shouldn't just be a yes?
Hearing none? That's it. Look, one page done already.
Andy, only thing is that if we're looking at this page, you need to flip it over to page 16
Yeah.
for the same categories for industrial 1, 2, 3 GIOS. We need to be kind of looking at 2 pages at the same time. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll tell you what, let's go through this stuff, because this is probably going to be the harder ones, and then we'll, if
Yeah,
I
because
have
if we're
to come
doing it
back
by
to that
use, we
separate.
want to have all the, yeah.
Yeah,
on
and if it weren't double-sided, I would say to rip out, I don't know, to rip out the staples, but I bet it probably doesn't line up, does it? Or can it? Let me see if it can. Yeah. Nope.
Residential multifamily and mixed use. But I appreciate the fact that they're double-sided. Thank you for the effort.
Okay. Let me spread this out a little bit here, then I can. All right, so then let's go back to pet daycare facility. Well, or do you want to just go back to it afterwards?
Well, it's the only one in that first category that's got an S anyway.
Yeah, okay, pet daycare facility, industrial 1. Yeah, I'm jumping
Well,
down to
we're going
page
by use.
16.
So that we're not,
So, pet daycare facility, I mean, make the, I would say yes in the industrial 1. It's probably, you know, it's a great use, mill buildings, things like that. Okay, good. All right, so now we're moving to page 4 of 29. And 17 of 29. No, I missed something. 16 of 29. So they don't match up then, right? Single household, okay, oh, no, okay, we did, okay. We got 16, we got 4. So why doesn't 17 line up? Why does 17 not line up with,
yeah, it should be. It matches part of it.
yeah, okay. So we're gonna forget about the 16, we'll come back to that separately. We'll just take it without the industrial and that stuff categories for now. And then figure it, let's, I think that's where most of the stuff is, so let's see what we can get there. Okay, so we've got sorority or fraternity house. I am on page 4 of 29.
Use code 14.
And we have sorority or fraternity house in RM and S, and I bet we probably did have it somewhere.
Must be under G, it must be allowed under GI.
I would think so, although I'm. They're definitely not lining up here. I think something's missing. So, but anyway, is there a reason we want to leave it? Do we want to have sorority or fraternity houses off campus at all? Okay, so we'll make those no's. Okay, moving down to 15.2,
transient residential facility. What is a transient residential facility? It is, no, I think isn't that a hotel or inn or something like that? I gotta,
No, it's like a shelter.
shelter, it is a shelter, okay. It's the shelter that's not a halfway house, right? So,
Right, it's like Welcome House in Peacedale has a special use permit under that.
I'm not sure how that, yeah, the definition of that as opposed to halfway house, just to be clear.
okay, assuming that it's not a halfway house, because I think it is different, shouldn't that be just a yes in these other residential zones as well? Or at least out to the R40? Right, those state requirements will still play, well, not the three unrelated, but I think they're limited to 8 or 10, that there's capacity numbers on the facilities themselves.
And so these usually require extra parking?
No, usually, I mean, these people don't usually necessarily all have cars anyway.
So just to clarify, transient residential facility is defined as housing operated on a nonprofit basis intended for occupancy for periods of fewer than 30 days by persons who are temporarily homeless, the maximum occupancy of which shall not exceed 20 persons, including staff. Development plan review pursuant to the subdivision and land development regulations is required before such facility is operated.
Well, or they'd be going in front of staff for development plan review. They probably, under the new law, it's probably would be staff for development plan review. That could be referred to you if there are issues, but
I think it sounds like that type of facility brings a lot of traffic. There must be a lot of coming and going with 20 people in 30-day periods and staff.
right, they're gonna have to find a large building to do it, yeah.
I don't know, I think this might be worthy of a special use permit.
Okay, just think about the why, you talk about park, look at it, but the zones you allow it in, RM, MU,
So maybe a
In-
10,
I mean,
sewer and water.
it's really basically just kind of snobbery here. It's okay downtown, but we don't want it out in our suburbs. You know, I would say maybe make it an N in the R80 for the rural, because it's not facilities. If people are homeless, they don't have cars, they're not gonna be able to get to facilities or things like that. So my thought would be make it a yes in the others, except make it an N in the R80. And you've got development plan review anyway. Otherwise, what are you gonna come up with for standards for this? Specific and objective standards.
Well, and I think that the underlying issue here is the potential lack of review and public input. Because if it doesn't come
But you
before
know
the
what?
board,
Public input is gonna be always against them.
it
The
still
public, the
should
public
be.
against, is gonna be against it. If you wanna do that, then just make it a no.
I mean,
That's the way you want to do it.
well, that's the
But-
problem with this, with the legislation. It's taking away any,
Well, but as a
Public
practical
input.
matter, if you're making it, I mean, something like this, if you're making a special use permit, you might as well just make it a no anyway. Because everybody's gonna come out and find ways of saying, we don't want those kind of people in our neighborhood without saying that explicitly.
that doesn't mean that, but you're also assuming that if those people, as you put it, come out, that this board is automatically going to deny it, and that's not necessarily true. So, one person, there's no public, you know, that's the problem with the legislation that got passed.
So,
is that certain things, development plan review, are, the board is a sounding board. They listen to input, they help to craft a decision. All of that authority will be now on one or two staff people. And when, true, I'm just trying to talk about what the ramifications may be moving forward of that kind of a change, when the public is made aware of these changes.
I think that a lot of our R40 is still not amenable to people that don't have cars. They're, I think if that's a true concern, that homeless people without cars need to be able to get around, then I think a lot of our R40 wouldn't.
R10, R20, where you have sewer, water, and theoretically accessibility to mass transit.
Moving down, next one's line 20, educational institution, primary through secondary. I guess we probably would be keeping that as a special use permit. I can't see that, I can't see saying no to all those areas, and I can't see that being just permitted as of right.
I guess a question on that one is you have existing facilities that you don't want to make non-conforming, but what is the likelihood of a new private school coming to town and building in any of those communities? So perhaps we look at what our existing facilities are, where they're located, and those potentially can stay in S or a Y. But does anyone contemplate a new secondary educational facility coming into R80, R40, or R30 zones that doesn't already exist?
Well, we had two primary educational institutions that were brought forward when we had good numbers in the school systems.
Okay.
I mean, the whole crystal ball thing, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll leave that, we're not changing it for anybody, we'll leave them as special use, we'll have to come up with some standards for them. And I'm assuming probably the same thing for the special needs school, same list of zones and so forth. That's the sort of thing, maybe we can come up with the same standards for both of them. Okay. Higher educational institution, privately owned and operated. Do we really think that's going to happen? Should we just say no, where we have the S's? If we get someone who really wants it, we can always apply to change the zone.
Do we have any yeses?
So if a person wanted to open up, say, a cooking school,
Yep.
and they wanted to do it down at some vacant space downtown, this is saying that they would come to us before they could.
I think that's a special school, that's a couple down. If I'm not mistaken, wouldn't a cooking school? Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So not a specialty thing like a cooking school or a carpentry school, but just a
A higher
general ed
education.
school.
Yeah,
Okay.
higher education. We're leaving it as special use for primary through secondary and the special needs. We're just saying college, higher educational institution, that, it's so, again, what I'm trying to do is reduce our workload here to a manageable thing. If it's so unlikely, let's just make it a no, and now we don't have to come up with standards for it.
So Andy is correct. This cooking school under use code 22 would be handled under a special school, which is, use code 22 is public and private institutions providing training and/or instruction in art, business, bookkeeping, accounting, secretarial, and the like, cosmetology, dancing, driving, hairstyling, music. Oh, wait a minute, but then it goes on to say, but not including vocational and trade skills in automotive, construction, metallurgical, chemical, and similar industrial operations. So cooking, yes, more industrial trades, no.
So it might, New England Institute for Technology probably would not.
Not if they were looking to open up an automotive training school or some other.
No, that would be a special school. And if you're in the, and we already have that in 22, and it's permitted as of right in the mixed-use CN, CD, PH, and I think in some of the industrial zones. And then just no, we
CD, right?
the higher education thing is a private college. Right.
You gotta look at the other sheet now.
Is all the land around URI GI?
Yes.
So they couldn't expand into any space that isn't GI?
Well, the way it is now with a special use permit, they could in CD or CH. But I mean, I guess my question is, how likely is that to happen?
But then there's also the note about permitted as accessory use in IND 1, and then C section 101 zoning district.
So that's if, like, manufacturer, whatever, using training programs in their operation. So let's leave on 21, let's leave it a no for the CD and the CH. Then we don't have to come up with standards for it, and believe me, if Salve wants to come in, I'm sure, in fact, they'd probably prefer to be trying to come in and get a zoning amendment and get it just as a yes than have to do a special use permit anyway. But if somebody comes in, I think,
I'll just ask the question, if URI wanted to open a satellite business office on Main Street, you're gonna not allow them anymore?
well, no, we haven't gotten to the state-owned one yet. We're still at 21.
21-1?
Still- Yeah.
We're not at 21-1 yet. So, but that leads us on to 21. That's a good segue to 21.1. If URI wanted to do it, I don't know. I guess in my thought, that might be something where you want to do a yes. Again. Okay. I mean, okay. So we'll leave an S for 21.1. Okay. Religious services,
Again, just understand, Brown, Bryant, Roger Williams, Conn College cannot open a satellite office. Prohibited.
Well, it's not that they can't, as Andy said, there's a process, they can ask for a zone change.
right, well, we're going to leave it for they can what they can now, the commercial downtown or commercial highway.
So wait, is it, sorry, a satellite office is just an office. You're talking about a satellite facility where teaching would take place, right?
yeah.
Like an office would just be an office.
It's just an office, yeah, it'd be an office use wherever we allow offices.
Right, okay,
But if they wanted to have a satellite campus,
yes.
So 21 you're keeping as a special use for Land Use Code 21?
no, 21 I'm not, but for 21.1 I am.
Okay, so 21. Roger
21, which
Williams,
is
Brown,
privately owned.
Salve, Bryant would not be allowed to open a satellite facility in your commercial downtown, yet URI would.
With a special use permit. I think, as I said, I think we're looking more at probabilities here anyway. I don't see any of the others opening it, which is why I don't see the need for this.
And again, I guess my point is maybe you can just combine those two?
Well, I think you can't, because when they get out to the GI, the state-owned is allowed, but the private are not. Unless you want to allow the private ones in the GI too.
They're both yeses.
Not without a pilot agreement.
They're both yeses in GI right now. Like, they're identical,
Oh, okay.
right?
Okay,
Actually, both listings are identical.
okay, we will look for that then, okay. All righty. 23, religious services.
So does religious service mean a gathering of certain numbers of people?
Yeah, churches, synagogues, mosques.
It's not defined by numbers of people.
Yeah, could be 10, it could be 1,000.
So if I wanted to have like a morning prayer circle in my house, is that here? Is that part of this?
No, I
or
think
does-
we'd call that accessory use to your house. But if you had 50 people there every Sunday or Saturday or something like that, it probably would become a use like this.
Do we have a definition so it's not arbitrary? What would fall into this category?
Oh, yeah, there is a definition for use code 23, which reads, church, synagogue, mosque, temple, or other places of worship, including accessory halls, rectory, retreat centers, and similar activities.
Brian, do you think retreat facilities, does that indicate a residential type of use, or is that? I didn't catch the last part of your.
The last part was retreat centers or similar activities. Retreat center to me is like for, day-long meeting activities or things like that. I don't necessarily think that it requires overnight, but it might include overnight. I know a lot of religious institutions do youth retreats and things like that, or they may have diocesan-type retreats,
There was just a big case, there was a case by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court about, it was concerning tax exemption, but it was dealing with a campground out in western Massachusetts, but it was very much a religious thing. They had people who would come there in RVs or camping, and it was they had a whole religious program for them and youth ministry and things like that. So I'm actually fine, I think, with leaving this. I think it's something that may well be appropriate for some of these zones, but you probably would want to take a look at it. So the only thing I don't know about with is, oh, no, never mind. I was going to say make it a Y in RM, but that's not our goal here. Our goal here is only if we're going to be able to eliminate something with the standards. If we're going to come up with the standards, we'll just leave it the way it is and come up with the standards for all these zones. Okay. Religious housing. What is that? See section 501.10. How does that differ? That's like just the housing, the convent? That's development.
So, I mean, it looks like we already have some objective standards here, Andy. They specify minimum lot size, number of occupants, utilities, parking, signs. So we may already meet.
Okay, but those apply whether they're yet, allowed as of right or special use, right? Those standards. So I guess my question is, why bother having the extra S in the R10? Why not just make it a Y in the R10 since this, you've got the standards there that would apply that way? You can, but I think you have to be careful. I mean, they changed it to say specific, objective standards. So I think, if we do that too much, then we run the risk of someone challenging us and saying, no, those aren't specific and objective standards. And if they're not specific and objective standards, then the use becomes permitted as of right by law anyway. So that's why I'm trying to narrow that down. Okay, 24.1, drug or alcohol rehabilitation facility. So I'm not going to be foolish enough to suggest changing those. We'll keep all those and have to come up with something. Veterinary office. Okay, we've got an S in the MU. Just make it, I assume that's because of the residential component. So let's just make it an N in the MU. This is the sort of thing, we change one letter here and we eliminate a whole category of standards that we need. 24.4, residential care and assisted living land development project. Now see, this is the sort of thing with me. If we've got it as a land development project, do we really need the special use permit as well? I mean, what's it going to add? What standards are we going to come up differently for a land development project in the R10 from one in the RM? Well, I'm saying we've got standards as a land development project, and how do we satisfy the law's requirements for specific and objective standards for special use permit when, what's the difference going to be? How are we going to change the standards from a land development project in one zone to a special use permit in the other? I'd say either make it S throughout, and then just take these land development projects and, standards and make that the special use permit standards, or make it a yes throughout and just apply it as a land development project.
I would say yes throughout, just based on previous experience.
Okay.
So before we move on, veterinarian hospital,
Yes.
2431. On the second page, there's nothing in that entry at all.
Oh.
Like, did we just forget to fill in some spaces there?
Actually, I noticed there's another S here under commercial neighborhood. I missed that for veterinary hospital. I mean, is there really a reason to have a difference between veterinary office and, what's the difference between a veterinary office and a veterinary hospital?
Oh, maybe one can board animals and one can't?
Maybe. Well, healthy animals, they're both going to be boarding sick animals.
Well, yeah, no, they're veterinary office, no boarding of healthy animals. There's a different use code for boarding animals back, we already went through
Right,
that.
yep.
Veterinary hospital says medical and dental services as well as preventative and other related services, including the boarding and grooming of animals. But I would think that would be a veterinary office as well. I mean, the only definition for veterinary office is what it isn't, which is no boarding of healthy animals. Unless there's definition elsewhere.
Maybe we don't need veterinary hospital at all. This may relate to someone years ago who wanted a veterinary hospital in the CN zone, and it's probably one of these zone change du jours.
I actually
about
think
the-
you don't need veterinary office because we don't actually say what it is. At least a veterinary hospital, we say what it does.
How about the wildlife clinic? What zone is that in, and what would that be described as? They definitely keep animals there for recuperation.
Well, right, there's not, but even with the veterinary office, you can keep sick animals there. It's just not keeping healthy animals, not, I'm going away for the weekend, so I'm gonna board my dog. That's,
Oh, I see.
So it's rehab versus boarding, yeah, two different.
okay, so we'll come back to that and figure out maybe combining that. So, let's move on to 25.2, Public Safety Facility.
Sorry, before we go on, 25 has a bunch of S's on the second page, too.
But let's deal with that, we're gonna deal with the other pages afterwards.
Oh, I thought we were doing,
No,
I'm sorry.
we gave up because we couldn't get them to line up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that,
I'm
but
sorry. Okay.
so 25.2 is a public safety facility. Yep. It's probably police and fire.
Police, fire, EMS.
Fire, police, emergency medical services, ambulance service, civil defense, and other public safety functions.
Yes. It's okay with me? Right, they would rezone it GI rather than coming for a special use permit. Because again, what the heck, what are we gonna come up with standards for? A police or fire or whatever? No responding to fire calls between midnight and 6 a.m.? Guess we don't want the noise or something? I mean, I just don't know what we'd come up with. So, that's it for this page, 5 of 29. And we are now up to 6 of 29. Daycare center, up to 12 people. No, the home daycare of up to the 6, that would be allowed as of right. This is just a daycare, just a small-scale daycare center, which, someone could want to establish in a residential area.
And I would note the definition does exclude daycare operated by a business for employees, in which
By business what?
accessory to the business. A business running a daycare for its employees is not covered by this because it's considered an accessory use to the business.
Well, yeah.
Not necessarily a home, no.
Right. It could be something that was a house, and now they want to, it's not that they're going to run it out of their home, they're going to just use a house for it or something. I'm inclined to keep it as a special use permit because of the traffic concerns, and I think that's where I'd focus on the standards, that they have enough queuing area and stuff for drop-off and pickup. That's kind of the the key things that I've seen with that sort of thing?
And you could use the same standards for the yes in the next one in
Yes,
26.2.
we could. Or we could just change it, we don't have to, we could just say, well, just say yes or no on that one, but, or we could use the same standard, I think that's close enough. Okay, service organization. What's that, the Elks and things like that?
No S's.
No S's, oh, all right, we don't need to do it. Okay, cemetery. Do we really need a special use permit for a cemetery? So what's the difference, 28.1, does that include a crematorium? Is that why we have
Yes.
2 cemeteries?
Maybe we should call it crematorium instead.
Probably should.
Yeah,
Actually, that's what's listed under 28.1. That must be
Okay.
a typo.
okay. So can I suggest we make the cemeteries a yes in the R200 and the R80? A no in the R40 and R30? And I think the crematoriums, I don't know, that might be something that we, I guess I would just say make that a no in those, in all those residential zones. Okay,
So, sorry, for number 28, if I wanted to establish a cemetery behind my R200 house, I could apply to get a permit to establish a brand-new cemetery? Is that what this is?
yes.
Okay.
It's what people used to do without even getting permits.
Yeah.
So, you know, if it's R2, if it's R200 or R80, why not? Okay. Moving right along, 31, nonprofit museum or library.
I think it should be yes in the R10, RM. I mean, you don't know how big the lot, it would be based on the size of the lot.
Yeah. And also probably the waterfront too.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And spectator assembly, ooh.
Definition?
Auditorium, exhibition hall, sports arena, not racetrack, stadium and theater, outdoor sports facility, including gymnasium for athletic events such as swimming, skating, tennis, football, baseball, and other sports.
That's a strange category to have theater lumped in with all those other,
Well, we do come down below, you've got legitimate theater
oh,
With or without
legitimate
alcohol.
theater as opposed,
as opposed to illegitimate theater.
right.
Yeah, we should probably take out theater from, or we should probably put illegitimate theater in the spectator assembly definition. My thought is, just have the CN as a no, and the CW as a no to do that, simplify it. Okay? And then we do jump down to legitimate theater without alcohol and with alcohol. And I understand the with alcohol is kind of like to give an extra layer of protection there. So I can sort of see the distinction there. I just don't know about the CN having without alcohol, the S for without alcohol in the CN. What that sense that makes. I mean, our commercial neighborhood really is a downtown zone. It's just more mixed use.
Well, it's supposed to be for smaller scale, commercial type activities that can be integrated into existing neighborhoods.
So what do you say then? Then just no for CN, for legitimate theater without alcohol, and we'll keep the S's for the legitimate theater with alcohol. Okay. 38, outdoor recreation facility. I guess we can keep that, and we'll just use the supplementary regulations that we already got there.
It's odd that there's some overlap between this and the definition of the spectator assembly, though, isn't there?
Well, I think these things came up at various times, again, because people wanted things and people wanted to approve things.
The definition really isn't an overlap because an outdoor recreation facility is limited to camps, riding academies, or playgrounds. So,
Oh, you said sports arena and,
not for outdoor recreation facilities.
no, for spectators. Oh, I see. So it's not included in that? We don't have the definition, obviously, in front of us. So that then differs from a sports arena or a stadium with outdoor sports.
All right, bow and arrow range and clay shooting, and I know that comes from a particular thing, and we already have a section of stuff for it, so I think we just keep the S's there. Same thing, I think, with indoor shooting range. Field trials. What are field trials? Those,
They are competitions where dogs go and,
okay? I didn't know we have a use for that.
We do.
Who wanted to do it? And where?
they used to hold them on Rose Hill Road, on what's now the indoor, yeah, because they had the land and the interest, and there was,
So I guess there's a question, should those just be permitted uses in the larger zones?
yes. Makes sense in the,
Even in R40?
no,
Okay.
I mean, usually those kind of events are held on large tracts
Yeah.
of land.
All right, so N for R40 and yes for R80 and R200. Country clubs. And country clubs include golf course or not?
Yes.
Because we also have a separate, so a golf course in the 33s, with or without alcohol, doesn't include a country, is without a country club. But a country club can have a golf course. Thoughts? I don't know, I would have thought that would just be accessory to the golf, to the golf course.
That's listed as part of the country club, golf course, with accessory uses such as clubhouse, office, cart rental, pro shop. Run that by me again?
Under the current regulations, yes. How they were permitted historically, we're not sure.
How is the clubhouse different than a restaurant?
A clubhouse is usually an accessory use, right, to an existing,
Yeah.
No, but I guess the country club at Laurel Lane, is that not just a restaurant that happens to be on a golf course?
No. They,
I mean, yeah, a lot of, yeah, I mean, even, yeah, a lot of golf courses have restaurants, and they have those restaurants open to the public. And others don't. They have, you have to be a member or a guest
Membership fee, yeah.
to eat at the restaurant. Others say public welcome for the restaurant.
Is country club then private, where the public's not welcome? Here?
Doesn't specify.
How likely do we think there are to be new country clubs coming in?
I would think there's a good possibility of it.
Okay.
Demographics, I don't know.
Well, I guess what's the definition then of a country club? Is that the one that's private, that's not open to the public, that you need to
Does
join?
not specify public or private. The definition reads, for use code 33.2, golf course, unlighted, with accessory uses such as clubhouse, office, cart rental, pro shop, maintenance facilities, swimming pool, and tennis courts. Food and non-alcoholic beverages may be served to golfers and their guests.
Okay. So then this would be no public thing. Okay.
It does not specify public or private.
No, you said golfers or
No
their guests.
alcohol in a country club?
Would have to be, that means, I suppose it'd be a public country club? Okay, I guess we need to think about that.
The definition.
Yeah. So I guess I'm scared to ask, what's 33.4? What's a marina yacht club? Probably similar to that, with definition?
Marinas, including accessory boat storage, sales, service, and repairing, retail sales of boats and marine accessories, sales of fuel, lunchroom or food and beverage sales, showers and/or changing facilities, recreation area such as swimming pool, boat charter service, ship's chandler, yacht clubs including accessory restaurant, party or function rooms, sailing schools, beach clubs, small boat rentals, boat chartering services.
Allowed in GI only currently. It would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, do we have waterfront in the R80, R40, R30? Do we have waterfront areas there? We probably do, actually. Yeah, we probably do. All right, so let's leave those there for now, and thinking that this country club and marina yacht club, they're probably gonna have similar standards dealing with capacity and traffic and stuff, but we'll leave those as special use permits for that for now. I don't think we're gonna get rid of them. And golf course without alcohol, is there a definition on that or not? Just
Yeah, there is. Golf course, unlighted, with accessory uses such as clubhouse, office, cart rental, pro shop, and maintenance facilities. Food and non-alcoholic beverages may be served to golfers and their guests only. A restaurant that caters to the general public is prohibited. The floor area of a clubhouse shall not exceed 3,000 square feet gross leasable floor area. Accessory structures such as cart rental and maintenance facilities where the public is not allowed may be constructed, subject to the approval of the planning board at the time of development plan review.
So the big difference in the definition is the country club can have swimming and tennis. The golf courses don't. And then the golf course is a little bit more specific about the size and so forth. But some of those things in the golf course definition could be special use permit standards. I think we have to look at that together holistically with the country club, and figure out what we're doing there.
It seems to me that we could create a set of standards for the golf courses, country clubs, and yacht clubs.
Yeah.
Probably handle all
And
three.
combine some of the,
Yeah. Well, or even if we just keep them separate, but we could come up with standards that would apply. And that would be, you know, I think that's close enough that it's specific and objective. Okay. Indoor sports facility,
why is it an S in CD but a Y in CN?
I have no idea. So make it a Y in CD? Okay. Nonprofit community center. I guess my thought there is nonprofit community center, is that like the
Like the Y?
YMCA or the Boys Club or something like that?
Community center for nonprofit organization, which may include the uses set forth in Use Code 34, which is indoor sports facility, bathhouse, public bathing, bowling, billiards, and like sports, boxing, dance hall, gymnasium, indoor swimming, ice and roller skating rink, indoor tennis, squash, racquetball, video arcades, and accessory restaurant for users of the facility.
The only difference is it's nonprofit. Nonprofit indoor. So I guess my thought is, you know, maybe it should just be no in those residential zones.
It specifically references examples like the YMCA and JCC.
Are those in residential zones?
The Y is in a step
may be.
district.
I think we have stuff for camps separately.
Yeah, I think that, yeah.
Yeah.
They're under like outdoor recreation and stuff.
Well, is the association, is the homeowners association clubhouse, like the one down in Matunic? That's, yeah, is that what this?
Yeah, that's probably a nonprofit community center. Okay, so we'll keep those and need to come up with something for them. Nonprofit fraternal organization. I think so, yeah. Make that a Y in the RM? Okay. Bed and breakfast up to 12 rooms. I think, yeah, we got to keep those as special use permits. Come up with standards. Motel or hotel over 20 rooms. We've got these special use for RM, MU, and CD.
Can we go back for just a minute? Could I just ask for the definition, the difference between between B&B and Airbnb?
They
Which
have a
is-
permit process and a yearly renewal licensing kind of.
For B&B? Why wouldn't an Airbnb, which is just a B&B you've booked online, be the same thing? Like, how would you differentiate that?
An air,
Yeah, an Airbnb is just a short-term rental mostly.
B&B has specific criteria, I mean, it's pretty well vetted.
Right. I mean, that's, the problem is is the lack of regulation of the Airbnb, not the,
Not the legitimate B&Bs.
Thanks.
be worth a future discussion.
So I guess, we can, motel over 20 rooms, we can keep it and use the 501.9 stuff for the special use, or do we want to just make some of those Ns and make CD a Y and make RM and MU an S? I mean, an N rather? Do you want to eliminate it that way?
And I think what we would do is we'll look at the standards, and potentially if we are comfortable with the standards or increasing the standards, they may be able to become Ys if the standards support it.
That's the thing, is that we and the other 38 cities and towns are now having to go through all of this and evaluate the special use permit and then come up with standards. And I'd like somebody to kind of guess at how long and how much effort that's going to actually take. Has nothing to do with housing, but it was in part of the housing package.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just trying to see, like I said, I'm trying to pick off some of the low-hanging fruit where we got like 1 or 2 S's, and in fact, I think we're gonna kind of speed up that way, where we've got 1 or 2 S's in the whole row of them, if we can get rid of it and eliminate that whole, needing to come up with a standard for that whole category. That's what I'm kind of looking for here. So I'm gonna go down to 41.4 for mortuary and or funeral home, and I think probably we'll leave those special use standards there and look at with crematorium. And now we're on to page 8. Yeah, 43, office over 50,000 square feet. S for commercial highway. And limited business service over 50,000 feet. I guess, do we really care that much about, I mean, we're regulating stuff like that through development plan review, and pretty much the only place it's happening mostly is the Route 1 Special Management District anyway. So I'm thinking just put in, no, I'm thinking of getting rid of the S, and I'm thinking of just saying, why, yeah.
Wait, why? What's the square footage on the storage facility? Anyone know?
That'd be above 50,000.
So a Y would just mean by right?
Yeah, I would.
I don't like that.
Support.
Okay. All right, so let's leave that as an S. I'm thinking we can combine some of these things, 43, 44.2, and when we get down to like the retail over 50,000, I mean, that was the ideal. The idea, the big box stuff we wanted to have more control over. So we can have pretty similar standards on those sort of things. Actually, we don't even allow the retail, well, that's building material. Where's retail trade? Oh, we made it a yes. Now that is funny. In a commercial highway, you can have, the retail trade is not. The business service and the office are allowed over 50,000 with a special use permit, but the retail is just not allowed over that. Okay, well, then we don't have to worry about including it. Okay. I digress. 46, construction service. Oh, well, you gotta recuse yourself from this one then.
Construction service is defined as cabinet-making shop, carpenter service, electrical contractor, job shop, painting, paper hanging, and decorating service.
with or without outdoor storage. Because again, with the contractor, some contractor yards come a 10,000 square foot building with a 50,000 square foot laydown area. Versus more stuff we have on Main Street is more office space and contained indoor storage.
As opposed to West
So
Kingston.
the average person drives by those facilities and doesn't realize they're contractor offices. Because there's little to no back of house, versus we have another facility in town that came in recently and has probably 10,000 square feet inside and 30,000 outside. Unpermitted 30,000 outside. Working hard.
I think you should compare that to the use code 47 heavy construction service, which covers concrete, masonry or plastering service, general contract construction service, plumbing, heating, and air conditioning service, roofing and sheet metal service, and well drilling.
Madam Chair, potentially, and again, never, not necessarily want to make more work for us, but it'd be potentially my recommendation that we look at the use codes under general services and trade and clean those up. And there may be some synergy in combining those and better defining them. You know, because to maybe Peter's point, contractors' offices and contractors' facilities on the commercial downtown may be perfectly appropriate as long as there's limited outdoor space.
Okay. Okay. So then, we're gonna, there aren't that many under the wholesale trade stuff. There aren't that many other special use permits. You want to skip over page 9?
Yeah, I think we should.
Well, I'm thinking that it's
internally
getting
clean
close
it
to
up.
9:30 and we need to wrap it
Yeah,
up.
you're right, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've made a considerable dent in it, which is more than a lot of communities have done so far. So,
All right, thank you, Andy. And we don't have, do we have any updates on any other legal issues that we need to know about?
State Housing Appeals Board is not going quietly into the night. They are going to look at possibly hearing, what's the one that Keith sent the memo around today? Pardon me? District 5. So we filed a motion to dismiss as moot, saying that with the new law, there's no point in them hearing the appeal of the master plan. But Shab, and there's actually a couple, there's an Narragansett and there's like Coventry, there's a couple of them where that same argument's being made, and they're gonna try to hear that argument about the mootness fairly, they said by the end of September, when they could get a quorum. Sometime before the end of September, they're thinking they could get a quorum to hear that issue. And in the meantime, everybody keep up the briefing schedule. And in fact, a draft brief was just sent to staff and myself and whatnot from Peter Squires today on the District 5, on the merits of it, with the idea that we'd file it soon. We seem to have a good case on that, and that we'd file that soon, going forward. But where we thought Shab was basically gonna do nothing between now and
As they have done for so
January-
many years.
Right, and go out of business quickly? No, they're not. So that's your other legal status update.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
Are you collecting these for next time?
In favor, second?
You collecting these for next time? Are we bringing them back?
And we'll have time before, whenever this work session might occur, to go to see a revised version of this, and the cheat sheet and everything else.
Oh, the affordable stuff? No, I was
The,
looking
the
at,
work session. Oh, I thought you were talking about the work
no,
session.
I'm looking at all of the zoning change.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning.
Wait, but I mean, do we bring this back? Do we give it back to him and then get it back again?
I think bring it back if you don't mind. We'll have some extra ones, I think, but if you can bring it back, that would be.
All those in favor to adjourn, say aye. Aye.
Peter's in the parking lot already.